Welcome back to the Red Truck Woodshop. If you'd like to see how I built this miter saw station completely from scrap lumber around the house, stick around. Welcome back to the Red Truck Woodshop. This is the next in my series of upgrading my shop. Today, I'm going to upgrade my miter saw station significantly. Let me show you what I'm going to do. So there's my miter saw on its table with a few accoutrements underneath, portable tools and whatnot. And you can see all the other stuff that I have on top of it. So I'm going to make it such that I put my other workbench where this current workbench is. You can see on my diagram here. And then I'm going to build a brand new bench to the left. The plan is to have the new piece set such that the top of the miter saw would be flush with the top of the existing bench. I'm going to put 8 drawers. Today's project's going to be reusing as much of existing stuff that I can without buying new. So I have 4 drawers from a old dresser that I made for my daughter that actually came from an old captain's bed that we had purchased. And then I'm going to make 2 new drawers, and I'm reusing all of the wood that you see in the miter saw station. So first thing to do is to disassemble what we got. I started off with taking everything off of the bench. I realized I have a lot of stuff. I have a plan for what I'm going to do with that later, but that's in another video. I took out the dust collection pipe that was behind the miter saw. Started taking the bench apart. There were carriage bolts and hex bolts holding the beams to the legs. I ended up reusing the bolts later on for the new project, so that worked out really good. And then I employed my wife to help me move the bench, installed a backer board, put all my stuff back on as neatly as I could. My lumber I'm going to make 3 inches. As you can see here, I've decided 3-inch square lumber posts and beams, which will be cut from 2x4s, which are nominally 3.5. So I'm going to cut this post, very old post, down to 3 inches square. Decided I'm going to cut off the face with the recesses that I have there. So I will cut those recessed faces off, make it look nice and smooth like it's brand new. I set up my saw to cut this. I did do this in one pass. Normally I would do multiple passes to get it deeper, but this one I decided I should be able to get it in one pass. I took my time making the cut, and it's a relatively light, soft wood. I'm not sure what kind of wood that is. I think it's cedar, but I'm not positive. I was very careful as I proceeded, and I cut this just a little bit wider and trimmed off the opposite face. Got the posts cut, nice 3x3 squares. Interestingly enough, I ended up with these angle-shaped pieces of wood from the posts. Not sure what I'm going to do with those, but hey, fun stuff ahead. So now it's just cutting the post to length and putting holes in the right spot, and we'll go from there. Even with my dust collection right there at the port, look at how much sawdust ended up on the floor. I then trimmed several 2x4s to length for the facing pieces, and I also trimmed some to length for the pieces that go between the front frame and the back frame. I took the 2x4s that were on the face pieces, cut off the round over on the one edge of the 2x4, and then I adjusted the saw to cut it to the proper width and cut off the opposite face, so I had a nice square joint there. I then proceeded to cut out the grooves for the lap joints in the legs. You can see that the legs are clamped together, and I just did multiple passes with my circular saw and the straight edge to cut the grooves. This is the best way to assure that all of your grooves are lined up, same depth, same width. It makes it very easy when it comes to assembly. These particular grooves cut here are in the top for the top lap joint, and then I cut the bottom lap joint. Then it was on to some quick assembly. I drilled holes for the hex bolts. This is the rear frame we're looking at here, and installed the hex bolts. I put them in at a diagonal like that. That gives you a little bit better resistance to racking as you're going. Then I installed the carriage bolts, tightened everything up good and tight. Some of the bolts were just a little bit long, so nothing a sawzall can't handle there. Then I went on to drill pocket holes in the intermediate pieces that go between the legs. Installed them relatively quick, not very difficult with pocket holes. I love pocket holes. Then the stretchers between the front frame and the back frame. I purchased some adjustable legs for this because every floor is uneven. We've got this assembled here, but got a problem. It's got a little bit of a rock to it. And you can see down here, I got about a 1/4 inch or so gap down there. And I know why that is. The reason why that is because this board right here is warped just a little bit. And when I tighten everything up and everything's in the right spot, it pulls that one leg up. So I'm going to try and fix that here. Okay, so the first solution I'm going to try is I'm going to try to just loosen these two sides, let that go down, and then refasten these. And that should do it. We'll give that a try. Okay, that seems to have fixed it. All right, we're good. Continue on. Then I gathered up more 2x4s, cut them to length so that they could be part of the interior of the cabinet. I drilled pocket holes, love pocket holes, so that I could connect everything. I installed them in the cabinet. This is for the wood storage area. Funny, looking at this now, I can see that end piece and how the warp really affected how things are. I then cut pieces for the sides of the wood box and the bottom of the wood box. I said it once, I'll say it again. Measure twice, cut once. I measured once and cut many times. Shoot. Dang it. Time to make a few more pieces. I cut the new pieces, put new pocket holes in. These pieces here are for the drawer slides, and careful placement was necessary so that they could be at the correct height. I drilled more pocket holes in the side panels and the bottom panel for the wood box and installed those. Okay, so far so good. Got the skeleton put together with a few errors. Had that one piece there that actually 3 pieces there that I cut too short, but I've got the wood box that'll go under the miter saw station framed out. Next I need to add some blocks along the rails. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a piece onto here so that the plywood can fit right down in here nice and flush with the top rail here. So that's the next thing. I'm going to use these pieces that I accidentally cut too short for in here. They'll do fine for a few pieces along each side here. So that's what I'm going to do. I took those pieces and trimmed them to the appropriate width so that they would make the plywood flush with the top and not stick beyond the bottom of the face 2x4 there. I used 3-inch decking screws to attach them to the face pieces. At this point, I took out my sander and sanded the face of it very well. This took a lot of the ridges off of the 2x4s, made the joints more flush, made everything fit better. I then started to cut the top for the bench. Had a sheet of plywood that I had from a previous project that I took apart, cut it to width and length, and installed it. Okay, so far so good. Turning out nice. Got the top all sanded and the face all sanded. And give you just a quick little tour of what we're going to be doing. So first off, I want to look down in here. You can see we added the supports for the drawer slides. So I decided, hey, I got 2x4s, and so, the slide is going to mount right there on this side. And then if you notice, I made it the exact same width as the front piece here. And so the drawer slide will fit really nice on both sides of that. And then of course drawer slides will mount to that plywood there, and drawer slides will mount to those 2x4s there. And over here we got the box for scrap wood, and I want to show you what I'm doing here. So normally I would just have a 5-gallon bucket, and I was just going to set the 5-gallon bucket in there. But then after talking with my wife, I decided putting a tub in there like that would be a little bit better. So that's where we're going with this. With the frame finished, I moved it into its final place and leveled it up with the leveling feet. Okay, so I have the miter saw temporarily set up in its final position, and I have a temporary dust collection set up. We're going to continue on with making the drawers now that we got this set up and usable. So onward with the drawers. So these old drawers here need a little bit of work. You can see the drawer slide used to be here, and these pieces have all come loose, so I'm just going to take those off. And I'm going to reinforce the bottom just a little bit, because on some of these the bottom is not all that great. Let me find one here. So you can see on the bottom there it's given away, so I'm going to fix that up a little bit as well. Okay, I got the drawers reinforced. You can see I've added these pieces to the bottom to support the bottom better. And as you can see, I've done pocket holes to fasten it into the sides. Also, I added a screw up here so that the sides and the back and fronts could be attached to each other better. So let's get it mounted. The drawer slides I purchased were 18-inch full extension drawer slides. That way I could have easy access to everything in the drawers. I need to fasten this bench to this bench. This leg has some holes in it back in here that I'm going to use to fasten the two together. That way, when I set up a fence with a stop block on this side, the two will not move from each other, and that'll keep my measurements accurate. That's next. I clamped the legs together, and there's nothing fancy about this, just a couple wood screws into the frame. I need to put a backing board behind this to keep stuff from falling behind my new bench, and then I'm going to build a hood around the saw here. In order to do that, I'm going to take the two shelves down And then I'm going to put a backing board up here, and then I'm going to put the shelves back up and build a hood. The reason I had to take the shelves down is because the hood of the saw would be taller than the space that I had available. The piece I'm using for the backing board is once again from that old bed that I had made for my daughter that I showed you in the beginning. The hood was made out of plywood, just two sides and a top. I have a plan for this, but that's a whole separate video. You can watch the other video to see how it all ended up fitting together and the experimental process that took place. I fastened the hood to the bench with simple pocket hole screws. I got the hood and part of the backer board up there. I didn't have enough backer board to do the whole wall behind there, so I need to cut some more pieces from other things. I'm going to pull these pieces out and cut them into appropriate sizes to fit them up there. Probably take about 2 of those pieces to do that. So that's next. These pieces that you see here that I'm taking apart are once again from that old dresser bed assembly that I had made for my daughter. These panels were MDF with 1x trimmed around to the outside. So I'm trimming off the 1x's and then I'm cutting it to the appropriate width for the backer board. There's the finished product of the backboard and the hood. The hood still needs some modifications, but getting there. I will say for the hood, I've used it a little bit here, and you can see there's a fair amount of dust collected in there, so still working on that. Okay, we're coming along good here. Got the bench moved over here, got the main bit of this bench built. I want to build the upper part here where these 2 top drawers are going to go so that I can have the extension of the table for the miter saw. So that's the next part I'm going to be cutting. If you look closely, you can see that this particular sheet of plywood is bowed, once again from another project that I had done. So the bow in the plywood, I had to work with it as best I could, and it actually turned out fairly good. I cut some thin edge banding strips from scraps I had, put some glue on it, and nailed it in place. I did this on the faces and on the sides so that I got a good look and covered up that plywood edge. Then I went ahead and sanded everything as best I could so that we had a good surface. So while I'm waiting for the glue to dry on this, I cut the pieces for the drawers that go in the 2 upper spots there. And here's one box just clamped sort of. So the drawer is going to be pretty big. I'm going to cut a groove in the front, back, and sides for the bottom. The bottom is going to be this piece over here. Once again, another piece of reclaimed stuff. So I'll be able to get 2 drawers worth of bottoms out of that piece and go from there. Because the groove was so thin, I did not see the need to use a dado blade, so I just made multiple passes with my saw blade to make them. The sides of the drawers were made from BC plywood, so I had a few knot holes to fill. Then more pocket holes for assembling the drawer. I put pocket holes in the top drawer piece to fasten it to the main cabinet. I installed the drawer slides before I mounted this because it would have been darn near impossible to mount them after it was on there. Here you can see the plywood had that bow in it, and I clamped it down so it was straight. After I put the screws in, it was nice and straight. The bow wasn't that bad. I made a small bracket for holding the pipe that comes from the miter saw dust collection, and then I installed it using a pocket screw and a straight through screw. Alright, good progress today. So far, got my dust collection port there. Clamp is on there because I accidentally split the wood, so we're gluing it back together and holding it in place at the same time. Next step is to make an upper shelf like so that will cover the dust collection. I installed the support pieces once again using pocket screws, and then I installed the shelf on top with simple screws going down in. I searched through my plethora of screws because the T-track is not supplied with screws, so I looked through all that I had and fit as best I could. Installed the T-track. They have screws approximately every 6 inches along this. I installed the shelf on the other side the same way that I did the first shelf on the left side. I made a couple simple stop blocks out of walnut. I made it so it would flip up out of the way so that I would not have to remove it from the track if I had a piece that I wanted to fit in there. I cut some MDF pieces and some plywood pieces for the 2 small upper drawers, cut them to length using the new stop blocks, and tried to fit. The bottom of these 2 upper drawers is made from this part of the old bed that I had made for my daughter. I cut this box apart and used the large pieces to become the bottoms. Once again, pocket holes are the assembly method of choice. I put holes in the bottom and the sides and assembled it together. Okay, well, when making this, I decided to use MDF because, well, this is a scrap wood challenge. And I want to show you, this is why I do not like MDF. Very little force relatively, and it splits on me. See what I can do to fix that. I fixed it using glue and clamps, similar to what you saw I had done with the dust collection holder. So you can see all my drawers are made out of various scrap wood, as is the bench. I said in the beginning that I was going to be using as much of the existing lumber I had, and so far I have not had to purchase a single piece of lumber for this assembly. So next is going to be the hardest part of this challenge, which is the drawer faces. The drawer faces on the larger drawers need to be 8 1/4 inch tall by approximately 27 wide. So finding material for that's going to be interesting because I've used up almost all of my plywood. You can see that's the wood that I have left, and so I got one large sheet, but that one large sheet will only cover about 4 drawers. So I need to find some other stuff. I've decided that these 2x6 and 2x8 are going to be my drawer faces. It's going to be a little bit challenging because of these holes that I have in these 2x6s, but I'm going to give it a good shot. Out of the center section of the 2x6s, I'll be able to get 2 drawer faces each, so that's 4. And then this 2x8 here, I will be able to get 1 drawer face out of that, so that's 5. So the real challenge comes here at the ends. Between the holes and the end of the board is not quite long enough to make a drawer face, so I'm going to start with the easy part and splitting the 2x6s appropriately and of course cutting them to length. So I cut the 2x6s to length, cut off the end that I didn't need, set up my stop block. You notice I used the measuring tape for the stop block. I do intend on putting an integral measuring tape with the stop blocks. I just haven't gotten to that yet. I split my 2x's in half using my usual method with the table saw, progressively making deeper cuts. My saw does not cut deep enough. I guess I'm going to have to finish this one by hand. I checked, my band saw is not deep enough either. It only goes 6 inches deep. This is 7 1/4. So, time to saw by hand. Yay. After I got the 2x's cut in half, I glued them up to make the panels big enough for the drawer faces. For the 6th drawer face, I found another piece of 2x6 that I ended up using, splitting in half, similar to the way that I split these in half and glued them back together. So that's where that piece came from. I ended up not using those other pieces for drawer faces. I used those later in the video. I gotta say, things turned out a lot better than I expected. Look at how nice those drawer faces are going to look. I mean, the worst thing I got is I had to fill a nut hole because the nut was starting to fall out. But other than that, these things turned out really nice. So, amazing what you can do with a 2x6 and or a 2x12. I installed the drawer faces. I put a temporary straight edge on the bottom to line everything up. Using that as my guide, I set spacers in between the drawer faces. I drilled a hole in the exact center of the drawer where the knob was going to be and put a screw through that hole to temporarily hold it to the drawer until I could fasten the drawer face from the back with other screws. I took those pieces that were not long enough to be a drawer face and cut them in half to be the door face for the scrap bin. I glued them up and made one big door. The reason I made one big door is because I only had 2 hinges and I didn't want to buy any others. I got the door all sanded and I put a little straight edge here to set the door on as I had mounted it. And when I set it up against the cabinet like so, I ended up noticing that the door is warped and it came further away from the top here than it did down there. So to fix that, what I did, you can see here, I routed a groove right along there, and it's actually a tapered groove. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it is a tapered groove that I put in there. And so now, when I set this in here, this insets into there just a little bit. And everything fits up pretty nice. Yes, it is a little bit thinner here and thicker up here, but this is shop equipment, shop stuff. I want it to look nice, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So that's what I ended up with here. So we'll get to putting it on. I had originally planned on making the drawer pulls myself, but my wife found these red truck drawer knobs that fit perfect. Another awesome project finished. See you next time. Okay, where these two top drawers go so that I can have the shelf for my, god darn it. I got the door all sanded and turned out really nice. And then I went to fit it over here. I made